She'd walked through 1,000 airports in her lifetime, some barefoot, carrying paper tickets with fading ink. Others in heels, stepping over polished marble beneath glass ceilings built to impress people who never looked up. But no matter how much the buildings changed, the gaze never did. That quick assessment at check-in. That subtle, reflexive pause from the concierge. That moment when someone scanned her, not for security but for assumption. Her face didn't match their expectations. Neither did her clothes. Not expensive enough. Not curated. Not loud. Just clean lines. Functional form. And always watching. Because before she became the owner, she had been the overlooked. And she had learned everything she needed to from the waiting areas they tried to keep her out of. Her first flight was a hand-me-down ticket from a friend who couldn't go. She was 17. The plane was old. The window scratched. The air dry. But she sat upright the whole time, wide-eyed, studying the rhythm of everything. The crew, the light, the sound of the seatbelt sign turning off. She knew, even then, this wasn't about where she was going. It was about how. She worked every job that got her close to the runway. Bag handler, tarmac cleaner, gate support. Not for money, for understanding. She saw how aircraft were rotated, how schedules fell apart from a single missed connection. She watched passengers get loud and staff get smaller. And behind it all, she saw the business of flight, how decisions made in boardrooms affected strangers in terminals. She didn't take notes. She remembered everything. Her first promotion came without ceremony. She stayed late one night when a storm grounded every plane. The manager panicked. She rerouted 3 flights using a whiteboard and a voice loud enough to cut through 100 angry customers. By morning, the station chief knew her name. Within a year, so did every regional hub. Within 5, she was the youngest operations director in the company. And within 10, she bought the airline's struggling West Coast division for less than the value of its spare engine inventory. People laughed. Until she turned it around in 18 months. Changed everything. Staff training. Route structures. Even uniforms. Not to impress shareholders. To restore dignity to the crew. She knew that people who were seen performed like they mattered. And now, so did the industry. Eventually, she consolidated. Merged 2 carriers. Launched new routes. Began building something her younger self would never have dared dream. And yet, even as CEO, even as owner, she flew economy half the time. To remember. To see. To remain fluent in the language of overlooked space. Because altitude didn't erase history. And boarding zones didn't protect from bias. She understood the system so completely, she could now break it from the inside. And on this particular morning, standing at gate B9, facing the same expression she'd seen for 20 years, she smiled. Because some people still didn't know what ownership looked like. But they were about to learn. The gate agent stood stiff. Not with confidence, but procedure. He was young, crisp in uniform, his nameplate gleaming, posture practiced. He had memorized every protocol but not the people behind them. He saw only the silhouette of a rule. First class meant polished shoes, wheeled suitcases, business-tone voices. It meant people who moved like they owned time. She didn't match. And so he denied. Not rudely, not harshly, just with that quiet authority people wield when they're sure the world works in their favor. "This line is for first class," he repeated, adjusting his lanyard. She didn't correct him. She simply stepped aside, took out her phone, and opened the internal channel only 3 people in the entire organization had access to. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't escalate. She uploaded a photo, the gate sign, the agent, the timestamp, then one sentence. Audit required. Gate B9. And then she waited. Not 10 seconds passed before the regional director saw the alert. Not 10 more before the VP of Airport Operations pulled her manifest. And in under a minute, her name, CEO, owner, founder, flashed in a dozen inboxes. But none of that was the point, because she wasn't seeking apology. She was conducting a system check. In the sky, when a single light on the dashboard blinks yellow, captains run diagnostics. Not because the plane will crash, but because small failures in small places mean bigger trouble later. She wasn't angry at the agent. She was checking the warning light. And right now, gate B9 was blinking. She stepped out of the line, sat near a pillar, watched. Passengers flowed through, businessmen nodding into Bluetooth calls, stylists with garment bags, influencers adjusting hoodies for pre-flight selfies. None of them were asked for confirmation. None of them were told to step aside. They passed not because they followed protocol, but because they looked the part. She wrote a second message. Bias observed at frontline. Pattern confirmed. Escalate to training. Then she closed her phone and looked up. An older woman approached, dragging a worn duffel, holding a paper boarding pass like a lottery ticket. The same agent stopped her. Same words, same tone, same unspoken script. This time, the woman backed away, cheeks flushed, quietly moving to the general boarding group without question. But the CEO watched, and in that moment, she remembered why she built her airline. Not to climb, but to rewire. 20 minutes later, a uniformed staff lead jogged down the jet bridge and whispered something in the agent's ear. His face changed. He looked up, and finally saw her. His eyes widened, lips parted, posture faltered. But she stood, not with triumph, with stillness, because power doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it waits until it's necessary to speak. And now it was. The agent stammered. He moved from behind the counter, posture now less protocol, more apology. But she didn't flinch. She didn't offer him a way out. She didn't smooth over the moment, because correction, like turbulence, doesn't always come gently. She nodded once as he gestured toward the first-class line, now miraculously open to her presence. But she didn't move. Instead, she turned toward the older woman still waiting in Group 5. She walked to her slowly, quietly, and offered her boarding pass. The woman looked at it, confused. "I want you to take my seat," she said, calm and measured. The woman hesitated. "But this is first class." She smiled. "I know." The terminal watched, not because it was staged, but because real reversals command attention without sound. The woman took the boarding pass, still dazed. The gate agent said nothing. The crowd shifted in its silence. And she scanned herself into Group 5, not as a gesture, as a reminder, because the problem had never been about seats. It had been about assumptions. And today she was redrawing the boarding chart of their thinking. On board, the aircraft doors closed. The engines began their deep, rising hum. She took a middle seat in row 27, between a mother with a crying toddler and a man wearing headphones too big for his face. She placed her bag under the seat, rested her hands in her lap. She didn't mind. She'd designed this seat, chosen the fabric, measured the pitch, selected the traylock material to reduce noise. Because ownership wasn't luxury. It was detail. At the front of the plane, the older woman sat in 1A. Legs stretched, drink offered, blanket placed across her lap like an honor. She held the ticket like it might disappear. But it wouldn't, because no one could take it from her now. 2 rows behind, a travel blogger whispered to her partner, "Is that her?" They weren't sure. She looked too quiet, too ordinary. They had expected someone in heels, flanked by executives. Not a woman in sneakers and a travel hoodie. Not someone folding her knees so the mother beside her could reach the diaper bag. But this was her. And this was the future of their sky. When the flight landed, applause broke out for the captain. Standard tradition. But in row 27, as she stood and stretched, a ripple moved through the cabin. Slow glances, murmurs, nods of realization. No one said her name, but they didn't need to, because some power doesn't announce itself. It builds the runway, then lets others take off. When she stepped off the aircraft, she didn't exit through a private terminal or slip away with an entourage. She walked the jet bridge like everyone else, wheeled her bag like everyone else, and followed the signs like a woman who had places to go and no need to explain where. Outside the gate, a driver stood holding a placard, not with her name, but the logo of her airline. He didn't recognize her. That was fine. She waved him off, then stepped into the sunlight on her own terms. Back at headquarters, the aftermath had already begun. Her internal audit report, triggered quietly, triggered only by her, had set off a chain of reviews. Gate agents across 4 regions were flagged for behavior inconsistencies. Not to punish, to educate. Her philosophy wasn't built on firing people for habits the system had trained into them. It was built on retraining the system. She ordered an immediate revision of the boarding script. Mandatory implicit bias sessions rolled out across all terminals. And at the center of the updated employee handbook, a full-page image. The shot was taken from a surveillance camera at Gate B9, her, in line, handing over her boarding pass to the woman who would sit in 1A. Below the image, one sentence in bold. Power does not always wear what you expect. The world started noticing. Not because she asked it to, but because someone posted the moment online. Not her. The woman from 1A. She had taken a photo of the boarding pass, folded it into a letter, and shared the story on a travel forum. It was picked up by a journalist the next day, then by a newspaper the next, then by a global audience that had spent too many years boarding flights built on the myth that status looked a certain way. They called her humble. She disagreed. She was deliberate, not invisible, not modest, just tired of performance. She didn't own the airline to be seen. She owned it so others could be. Suddenly, her phone rang more often. CEOs called to praise her. Investors asked to feature her in magazines. Consultants offered to turn the story into a brand moment. She declined them all. Because for her, the moment had already happened. And it didn't belong in marketing decks. It belonged in training manuals, in hiring policies, in a culture built not on class, but clarity. That week, she personally hosted a session for new hires. No cameras, just her. She stood in the break room at the Dallas hub, surrounded by fresh uniforms and fresh hopes. She held up a copy of the boarding pass from Gate B9. Not to shame, to explain. This, she said, isn't about a mistake. It's about a mirror. We all hold one. What matters is how often we check it. No one clapped. They listened. And that was enough. The airline changed, not in color scheme, not in logo, not in font, but in feeling. The effect of her moment at Gate B9 wasn't a tidal wave. It was a quiet pressure that shifted the earth beneath the runway. Staff began watching more closely, not passengers, but themselves. Training manuals were rewritten, not as policies, but as principles. New check-in desks were redesigned with transparency in mind, lowered, more open, eliminating the literal divide between staff and traveler. Waiting areas lost their artificial separation. Even the first-class lounges became more porous, more human. Because status wasn't the goal anymore. Dignity was. She didn't tweet about the changes. Didn't do a press tour. She just kept walking terminals. Unannounced. Unaccompanied. Still in her quiet clothes and soft shoes. Employees whispered her name but never interrupted her. She was a presence now. Not looming but rooted. And her influence grew not through visibility but through visibility's opposite, intention. She launched a scholarship fund quietly. For young women in aviation. For single mothers learning aircraft maintenance. For undocumented workers studying logistics and flight engineering at night. The fund required no essays, no GPA, no polish, only proof of motion. Proof that they were moving forward despite every system designed to hold them down. And the first class of recipients. She met them at the hangar herself. Hard hats, open tools, a battered clipboard with her notes on turbine weight tolerance. No photo ops, just shared purpose. Her executive team resisted at first. Some called it mission drift. Some said the market wouldn't care. She told them the market was never the compass. People were. She reminded them, altitude without awareness is just air. In boardrooms, she stopped letting consultants present without sitting through 2 economy flights on red-eye routes. If they couldn't ride what they sold, they couldn't shape it. Suppliers were asked to tour the call centers they ignored. Contractors met with cleaning crews before bidding on new builds. No one was above the aisle. Not anymore. Meanwhile, the woman from 1A, she sent a handwritten letter to headquarters. It was framed and placed near the entrance of the CEO's office. Not behind her desk, but beside the doorway, where every visitor could see it on the way out. It read, "You gave me more than a seat. You gave me the memory of being seen. Thank you for owning more than the airline. Thank you for owning the moment." At airports across the country, gate agents began using a new phrase. All who are ready, welcome forward. Not first class first. Not priority only. just an invitation, equal in tone, powerful in design, and passengers noticed, not because they were told to, but because they felt it, like a shift in cabin pressure, unseen but undeniable. Time passed the way it always does in airports, measured not in hours but in delays, arrivals, and departures. Her company expanded, not through acquisitions, but through integrity. Routes were chosen not for profit alone, but for purpose, connecting overlooked towns to major cities, building opportunity with every takeoff. She insisted that every new route announcement include not just statistics but stories. Stories of families who could now afford to visit relatives, of college students getting home without 5 transfers, of engineers commuting to jobs once out of reach. Her airline didn't grow for scale. It grew for meaning. One day, while walking through a terminal she'd once helped design, she paused before an old check-in monitor. A child, maybe 10, was struggling to check in her own flight. The kiosk had frozen. Her parents were nowhere nearby. The line behind her grew impatient. Before anyone could intervene, she stepped forward, knelt beside the girl, and calmly reset the system. The screen refreshed. The boarding pass printed. The child looked up, eyes wide. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman smiled and said, "Any time," and meant it. Later that evening, she sat in her office. It was quiet. No meetings. No phone calls. Just the soft hum of engines outside the window as another plane lifted into the sky. One of hers. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small, creased photo. Her first day as a ground crew member, wearing an oversized vest, smiling with cracked lips and scraped knuckles. She placed it back gently, closed the drawer, and turned off the light. Her final project was her smallest, a bench, placed in the middle of Terminal C at the first airport she ever flew from. There was no plaque, just a name carved into the side in quiet lettering. Not hers, the name of the woman from 1A, because legacy isn't built by being first. It's built by choosing who you lift with you. When she finally stepped down years later, no announcement was made. Only a simple email to her staff. "The runway is long. I'll be watching from the sky." She took one last flight, not in first class, in the jump seat, with the crew, quietly buckled in, watching the sky curve around her life's work. And somewhere in an airport still buzzing with movement and story and new hope, someone is told again, "This line is for first class." And maybe, just maybe, someone behind the counter pauses, looks again, and this time, sees